Hi there, and welcome to One Idea Away, not just a podcast, but a community and ongoing conversation meant to inspire and empower individuals to live more fully, deeply, and consciously. Let's jump into today's episode right now. Hello there, everyone. Good to have you back. And I've got a question for you. How do we matter? You know, it's an interesting question that's often at the heart of how we act and interact as human beings. It drives individual behavior, social behavior, even how whole communities interact within as well as with each other. It's just one of the topics that our guest explores through his work on well-being in some pretty unique ways. My interest in his work as well as this topic stems from how we understand ourselves, how it is that we show up in our lives, and how we also flourish as communities, meaning how do we flourish together, not just on our own. As individuals, more and more people would not consider themselves well across all the domains of their life. Perhaps they are well physically, but they don't feel that same level of fitness or vibrancy or healthy attitude towards work. Maybe it's that they are doing very well economically or within their careers, but they don't have that same sense of well-being in their relationships. I want us to be able to broaden and see the different domains of well-being and of happiness that exist throughout the extent of our lives. This is an important conversation for us to be having right now because, as many of you may recognize, even within the most developed countries that are out there, we may be doing well at times in relative terms economically, and yet we're not exactly the role models for physical, emotional, and relational well-being. And so today, I want to get into this conversation about how we matter, why that matters to us, as well as broaden our understanding of these different domains of well-being. And if we could do that with having a couple laughs along the way, all the better, because even though these are serious topics, we can still have some fun. So to do that, to chat this through all today, we have as our guest, Dr. Isaac Prilleltensky. Dr. Prilleltensky was born in Argentina, now in Miami, via Israel and Canada and Australia along the way. He's the former dean of the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Miami, currently the Vice Provost for Institutional Culture, and also holds the Irwin and Barbara Montner Chair in Community Wellbeing. He's also a professor of Educational and Psychological Studies. He's published 9 books, including most recently, The Laughing Guide to Wellbeing, as well as over 130 scholarly papers, book chapters, and book reviews. He's a vegan, fitness aficionado, and a humor writer. And in 2015, he even received an award from the National Newspaper Association for his humor writing. And with all of that, Isaac, thank you for joining us here on One Idea Away.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So I've got to ask, because being a humor writer, a bit of a humorist, combining that with science, with well-being and psychology, that's not exactly something that you check off on career day. And so I'm a little bit curious of where did this passion come from for you?
I think it comes from a passion to integrate my different passions. So I have been told that I could make people laugh for many years, but I never invested the time to begin writing humor until about 4 or 5 years ago. So I decided to write a new book on well-being, which is The Laughing Guide to Well-being. The subtitle is Using Humor and Science to Become Happier and Healthier. So I decided to write serious chapters in the book with a few funny commentaries along the way. The result was that I started publishing humor columns for the local newspapers, for the Miami Herald and the Miami Today weekly. And eventually I combined all of it. So the book has 2 sides, the laughing side and the learning side. And it feels really good to be able to integrate 2 things that I'm passionate about.
That's excellent. Excellent. As people start to maybe become exposed to your work, the books that you've written, certainly the most recent one of The Laughing Guide, what is it that you know is kind of at the heart of your message, that core idea that you really want people to walk away with, to understand from the work that you do?
So there is a serious idea in combining humor with science. And the serious idea I call smarter through laughter. And there is a lot of science demonstrating that positive emotions open our minds to learning. Barbara Fredrickson did a lot of work on this topic, demonstrating the fact that when you're in a positive mood, you lower your defenses, you are more creative, you are able to think divergently, you brainstorm better. So my idea was to combine the humor that generates positive emotions, because really, when we're talking about personal change, a lot of us are very defensive. And I was just trying to use myself through self-deprecation to show that none of us are perfect, and we can all use a little bit of help just laughing at ourselves and seeing the ridiculous side of our tendencies, proclivities, habits, and then see what we can learn from it. So my message is, try to laugh at yourself a little. Try to laugh at me, the writer, and then have an open mind about what is it that can make our lives a little bit better in different domains of well-being, which is a secondary message of the book. Well-being is not just about one thing. And I wanted to bring to the table the fact that we're not talking just about happiness or psychological well-being, but I wanted to demonstrate that well-being is a very multidimensional thing that we should nurture.
Absolutely. And I think, so a few things. One, I think it's important, and I love the approach from that standpoint of infusing both our learning as well as our self-reflection with some of the laughter. Because when you think about humor and the fact that, if everybody thinks of caricatures, for instance, right? Caricatures are meant to exaggerate specific features within ourselves.
Right.
Well, what laughter can have us do is exaggerate some of those eccentricities, some of those tendencies that we have, that helps us kind of call attention to them and at the same time not take them so seriously, so that we can see them for what they are, see how they may be strengths, see how they may not be strengths at any given time, but to do it in a manner that feels a lot safer, feels a lot more inviting. And I really, really appreciate that angle of this.
Yeah.
The other aspect is you bring up this idea that well-being is so much more multidimensional
Yes.
than most people realize, and that certainly is a big part of the conversation I wanted to have today. So if you could share from your standpoint of how do you define well-being, and then we'll chat a little bit about those dimensions of it.
Sure. So there are different definitions of well-being, but the one I'm using now is a positive state of affairs, satisfaction with different domains of your life. And there are really 6 domains that I think are key for one's well-being: interpersonal, community, occupational, physical, psychological, and economic. They form the acronym ICOPE, ICOPPE, with 2 P's. And there is a lot of research that shows that our overall well-being, when people ask you, all things considered, how satisfied are you with your life? A lot of people are going through their minds thinking, what are my relationships like? Am I happy at work? What is the state of my physical condition? Am I emotionally happy? Am I depressed? So in short, these 6 domains of life constitute the key dimensions of well-being. Moreover, they're all related to one another. So interpersonal well-being, the quality of the relationships that we have with the people around us, is going to impact 2 really important aspects of health and wellness: physical well-being and psychological well-being. We know that the quality of relationships is a great predictor of happiness and physical health and longevity. So they're all interconnected. So it would be a mistake to concentrate exclusively on one for example, on work well-being, you may become a workaholic before you know it. And then what you're going to get is, instead of life satisfaction, you're going to get stress and possibly a heart attack. That's not going to lead to much well-being. So there are many examples of how one relates to the other. They're all reciprocal and synergistic.
I think it's interesting because there's certainly, with these different factors, and I love the example of how people, for instance, may gravitate towards one in particular, let's use occupational as you did, because it is true certainly that we may have certain strengths, certain values that bring these things out within us, but the interconnectivity of them is something that is very important for us to understand, the way in which these will ripple through different areas of our life and of who we are. But it's also that if we aren't mindful of both the interconnectedness and the balance that the system needs to be able to maintain, we can get very much out of balance by only focusing in on one particular direction. And I think that has a particular relevance to today's times, where we do have that tendency to lean in very heavily, where it is all work, or it's all the economic side of it, or it's all, something else, because we want to be distracted away from the other things that might be going on for us. And so that idea of the interconnectedness and the balance is a very, very important one. There's also something else with well-being that you speak about, which I think is really interesting, and it's this connection of wellness and fairness.
Yes.
And I'm not sure I've heard this connection from other research. So I'm very curious if you could explain a little bit of how wellness and well-being are connected to this idea of fairness.
Yes, absolutely. So my motto is that there is no wellness without fairness. So let me share with you how it works. If you're in a relationship with your spouse, with your colleagues, and you always end up with the short end of the stick, if you always feel that the other people are making all the decisions in your life, your spouse decides what to buy for the kids, where to send the kids to camp, what movies to watch, what car to buy, where to go out to eat, how to use the money you all bring to the house. If you're always feeling like you don't have a say, either in the process of making decisions, or you don't like the outcomes, then that relationship is not very fair. And lack of fairness is going to concentrate your mind on the fact that there is no justice in this relationship. So that is going to create a big cloud over other aspects of the relationship. The same happens at work. If you feel that you're in a work team where there are a lot of free riders, you do all the work, other people take all the credit, or people just don't pitch in, or you feel that there is favoritism in the workplace. There are many instances in relationships, at work, in the community, where lack of fairness is just becoming all-consuming, because as human beings, we have a high sensitivity to fairness and to mattering. And if we feel like we don't matter in this relationship, or if we feel like we matter less than other people at work or in the community, we tend to focus our energies on that deficit. Let's call it a fairness deficit. So it creates an inequality, and we matter less. And as I wrote in the book, mattering consists of feeling valued and adding value. If there is no fairness, I don't feel valued, and I don't have an opportunity to add value. People don't pay attention to my strengths. So I just think that lack of fairness focuses the mind on restoring equality, and therefore we're unlikely to pay attention to our overall well-being. Like when you have a very strong pain, all you think about is the pain. How can the pain go away? I'm not thinking about exercising. I'm not thinking about going to the opera. I'm thinking about how can the pain go away. And I just believe that lack of fairness, lack of mattering, making you feeling invisible or devalued is the physical equivalent to that physical pain. You can't think about anything else. That obstructs your creativity, your wellness. It's the opposite of positive emotions, right? Positive emotions create a state of affairs where you're more creative. Well, lack of fairness creates the opposite.
That's interesting, and you know, in even just the understanding that with things like that inequality, that fairness issue is something that we have high sensitivity to because it does relate also to the idea of how is it that we matter. And I do want to talk about, okay, if there is that, you know, inequity that is going on, what do we do about that? But before we get there, it was something that I had read on one of your recent articles, recent posts around the idea of, you know, mattering and how it is that we matter. And you wrote, everyday interactions at home, school, work, and the community involve mattering. We fear shame, rejection, and ostracism, and we crave recognition. We are not even aware of how much of our behavior is dictated by the fear of exclusion and the need for inclusion. And I'm curious if you could chat just a little bit about what does that look like? Meaning, how does that play itself out in our everyday lives? Because I think this is a really important topic for people to understand.
Yes. So I can start with adolescents. I mean, you can really think about throughout the lifestyle. Okay. So let me give you a 15 seconds of mattering in early childhood. Okay. The concept of attachment. Children need to feel securely attached to their parents. They have to feel that their parents are there for them to provide their needs for their needs and to be a secure base. If there is no secure attachment, if I don't feel valued by my parents, I can develop what's called an anxious or an avoidant attachment style, which means I hesitate to relate to other people when I grow up because when I was growing up, my parents weren't there for me. They didn't provide a secure attachment. That's early childhood. Fast forward to adolescence, okay? If I live in a family where I feel that my parents, my siblings don't pay attention to me so much, if I feel like I don't matter, they are not aware of my needs, they don't rely on me for help, I'm just kind of ignored as an adolescent. Well, there is research demonstrating that there are two types of negative consequences for lack of mattering in the family. One type is antisocial behavior, and the other type is self-destructive behavior. So adolescents who feel they don't matter in their family, they are either going to turn into self-destructive behaviors like depression and even suicide attempts, or into antisocial behaviors like vandalism, truancy, drug abuse, promiscuity, etc. And there is a very solid research on that. Now, let's move into adulthood. And we have seen sometimes the horrible consequences of people who feel excluded, ostracized, and they respond with great aggression. We have seen in school shootings, the Virginia Tech shooter. We can remember Timothy McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombings. These are just case studies of what happens when people feel I don't matter. And the research shows that people will do anything to feel like they matter, even atrocious acts of violence. On the other hand, we have a narcissism epidemic. We have people who feel they didn't matter enough throughout their lives. They have this huge sense of entitlement that in order either to compensate for lack of mattering, or perhaps they just grew up feeling so entitled, that we have people who really don't care about the well-being of others. It is all about me. Of course, I just shared with you, Luke, the extremes, antisocial and self-destructive, aggression, and suicide. But of course, there is a lot in between. And in between, we have anxiety, we have fear of being excluded from the workplace, lower self-esteem. So my point is this: we all have a responsibility to create a climate at work, in the community, in the family, where everybody is included. Everybody feels like I belong to this group, I belong to this institution, because this is the best preventive measure against either what we call internalizing disorders, such as self-destruction, or externalizing disorders, such as aggression or exhibitionism or types of narcissism.
I just wanted to pause for a moment and do two things. First, I wanted to say thank you. So many of you have been sharing and starting your own conversations, adding reviews and ratings, and just been really a great group of listeners engaging in these conversations and moving them forward. Thank you, because that's why we do this. Secondly, for those of you that are not already getting in on the action, or for those that have started to engage but you haven't yet experienced that full access, I did want to invite you to join that. If you go over to oneideaaway.com/join, that's going to give you first access to our weekly conversations, as well as the exercises, reflections, even the online challenges that we're now rolling out. We had a member just the other day write in and tell us how a recent exercise we released helped her identify several new possibilities she didn't realize were right in front of her. It dropped her anxiety, dropped her concerns and her doubts, and she was able to create a brand new option from the ideas that were sparked. She's now completely comfortable and confident to move forward on what had been a really tough situation. That exercise, it came from inside access at the One Idea Away community, the newsletter, the private group, the ongoing interactions and practices and conversations that we share. So I hope that you're going to join in on the fun and use it to connect to the peace and the joy and the confidence and support that'll help you create and experience the life you desire. Again, just go over to oneideaaway.com/join. And I really look forward to connecting with you inside the community.
So a handful of things, because I think what you highlight, in the sense that, we've shared some of the extremes, some of the polarities of how this can play out, but it is that in between land that so many of us do find ourselves in, and the importance of understanding, listen, even if this is where you are, even if this is some of the journey you've been on, the experiences you've had, just beginning to bring this into your awareness starts to break the hold that it has on the type of conditioning that you may have. And even if this just shows up in tiny little ways, as you said, it could be certain types of anxieties in certain situations. It could be certain bullying type tendencies in little subtle tiny ways, not necessarily big brash type of ways. It's all these little types of things that can pop up at any given time. And that idea of helping people understand that every individual matters, every individual is valued. You broke it down, before. Mattering is that both feeling valued and feeling like you are adding value to what's going on. And so I'm wondering if, let's approach it first from the individual and then from the group standpoint. So as the individual, let's say that I've got some of that maybe that be anxiety, some of that uncertainty within me, maybe just certain things I'm becoming aware of where I may not feel like I'm not really sure where I fit in. I'm not really sure how I matter. If I become aware of that, what are some of the things that I can begin to do to start to address that for myself?
Great question. So I think there are possibly two sources of exclusion, right? One may be I'm in a place that is really not healthy for me, right? It may be that I don't fit with this crowd. I may have found myself in a situation where I really am not in a health-inducing environment. Okay? And for some children, the best thing that can happen to them is to grow up and live a neglectful, abusive family. They feel liberated, right? You are liberated from an oppressive environment. Now, on the other hand, sometimes we ourselves create conditions where people don't so much want to interact with us, perhaps because we ourselves engaged in acts of excessive pride, arrogance, perhaps even a little bully, a little sarcasm. Perhaps we are pushing people away. And the research shows, for example, in the workplace, these people end up being isolated, right? Now, so sometimes it's you, sometimes it's the group, and sometimes it's an interaction between these two things, right? So I would like to ask people, first of all, examine the environment, then examine your own behavior and ask yourself, am I contributing something to this difficult relationship that I have? Why is it that people stopped inviting me to work meetings? Right? What have I done? Have I been unresponsive to my colleagues? Have I been too sarcastic? Have I put down some of my colleagues in public? Right? So it's me or it's the group. And then I would like to ask myself, what can I do to create a culture in the workplace where we can be civil, collaborative, and I can truly partner with other people? And in many cases, people are malleable. People can change if you know how to address your colleagues. And for that, we need some skills, how to talk to others, how to be a good listener, etc.
Excellent. You know, it's interesting because I also remember in the book, something I actually was just glancing down at some of my notes of things that I've copied down from what you've done, is you also provided almost even a great checklist of the acronym was Bet I Can.
Yes.
Right. So that idea, and I just share this because for everybody, it's a little bit of that checklist of what we can begin to walk through when we look at evaluating kind of ourselves as we kind of look through that and evaluating the environment and kind of where we are. And so it's behavior, it's emotions, it's thoughts, it's the way we interact, it's the context, it's the awareness that's there. And specifically, if we're trying to create change, the next steps that we take based on where it is that we want to go. And I think those are a lot of this. And something I wanted people to walk away with is that these are some really, really helpful models for us to be able to dive deeper into our understanding of well-being, into our understanding of ourselves, understanding of what we can do to move forward in a variety of ways. Now, the other interesting thing for me of when you talked about mattering and you talk about it as a framework, you've broken it down in one of the models of looking at yourself, looking at your relationships, and looking at your community. And I think it's a really interesting, you have a very interesting view of how much of this idea of well-being is something that is very interconnected, not only to ourselves, but interconnected to this broader group, social, communal aspect. And so if we are in the positions of creating a company, running a team, even in our own families, what are some of the things that we can do to create more of that environment where each person within it really truly understands that they do matter? Right.
Great question. So to reinforce the point you made about the Bet I Can model, so not everybody wants to buy a book and go through the whole book, but we created an online free platform. It's called funforwellness.com. So what we did was we used the behaviors, emotions, thoughts, interactions, all the Bet I Can, we call them drivers of change. And we actually conducted a randomized control trial of this online intervention, funforwellness.com. And we found out that people who use the drivers of change that we explain through games and case studies and vignettes, people report higher levels of well-being, including psychological and interpersonal well-being. So I want the audience to know that this is freely available. You can play games, you can watch some vignettes with professional actors, and then walk away with some skills to address the mattering questions that you were addressing. So basically, to to answer the question about I'm running a company, I'm running a team, what can I do to create this atmosphere? So I think the first rule always is to behave like an inclusive host. So I have the image of inviting people to a dinner party at your home. What do you do when they come through the door? You want them to feel at home. You ask them, do you want something to drink? How are you doing? Have a seat. How are your children doing? How's work? Being an inclusive host really is the best one can do to create a climate of mattering for everybody. Do not monopolize the conversation. Be a good listener. Be an asset seeker. What's an asset seeker? All of us have strengths. If you want to be a really great company or a great team, ask people to identify what are their strengths and build on their strengths. I call this being an asset seeker. So we have the roles of an inclusive host, an asset seeker, a good listener. You also have to be a visionary. People like to work for workplaces where there is a great vision for us to accomplish together. If I join a company and people are telling me, we're going to copy what Acme is doing, or we're going to copy the Toyota model, you don't feel very excited. People relate to a vision for your workplace and what you can contribute to the world. So you have to be able to inspire your colleagues. These are, 4 important attributes. Be an inclusive host, be an asset seeker, be a good listener, and try to provide the vision for what gives us meaning. How are we going to make the world a better place through this company, through this team, through this family?
Excellent. And there's one other question I want to get to also with values before we kind of bring our conversation around full circle. But one of the things that also jumps out at me in describing that of being the inclusive host, the asset seeker, the good listener, and visionary is, if I step also out of our professional arena, which we use that very often as our examples, but I even look at this from a family standpoint, and to be able to recognize what are those really unique strengths of each member of the family, being able to call them out in terms of, let's, our daughter is really good at this type of, maybe compassion or this type of nurturing. And we've got, our other daughter over here who's this incredible little problem solver and thinker around stuff. And, here's our son who just absolutely knows how to bring humor and fun into any given situation. To be able to call that out, to be able to help recognize them for their strengths, the assets that they bring there, and engage that actually as part of how the family works and operates, right? And it even brings that environment where we all matter. It can literally bring it home. It can bring it to the kitchen table in the family room, where it's just as much needed as ever, as it is in our workplace. And I'll leave Washington and politics aside for now.
But I think what you're describing are all examples of adding value. How can you ask your son, your daughter, your spouse to add value to your life, to the family life, and to their own lives, right? And very often we focus on people's deficits as opposed to focusing on people's strengths and assets. Everybody has something to contribute. We say give gifts of the head, the heart, or the hand. Everybody can contribute something. It is our job to make sure that we make contributions and we bring in others their contributions. They're going to feel like they matter. The more they add value, the more they feel valued.
The ability to look for how people, how our children, how our teammates add that value, and that ability to recognize them for it so that they know that you see it is just this wonderful thing. And at times, maybe it sounds a little bit on the simple side, but we take so much of this for granted that we don't make it our focus. We look at the deficits and, we're behind on this or behind on that, and forget that it's our strengths that have not only brought us here, but it's also usually our strengths that we build on even further that will take us much further than just even improving one deficit could ever possibly do. So the one other thing that I wanted to sneak into this conversation, because I think it also ties into this idea of, well, a little bit more loosely, how it ties into the vision of where it is that things can go. But you also have an interesting concept of tying values and how those values complement well-being. And I was wondering if you could just say a little bit more about that, because again, I think this rounds out this really interesting conversation on all the different facets and dimensions of what we mean by well-being.
Thank you. Values are the anchor of our life. So unless I am clear about the values guiding my behavior, I'm not sure how to make decisions when I am facing a dilemma. And there are three big types of values that I think we should keep in balance. One is values for personal wellness, like self-determination, autonomy, freedom, choice. I want to be in charge of my own life, right? Let's call it personal wellness values. Now, of course, these values have to be balanced against the well-being of other people. So let's call them collective values, right? So for example, the value of fairness. It's not just about what I want, it's about balancing my needs with the needs of my family and balancing my needs with the needs of the community, right? So some countries, people pay more taxes because they think it's an obligation to help other people who don't have as much resources, so I can contribute to good public schools and public health care, even though I don't have children in schools, but I still contribute, I pay for the well-being of the community. So I have to balance the values of personal well-being with collective well-being. These are two kinds. But there is a third very important kind of value, and I call them relational values. For example, solidarity, compassion, caring. And caring, compassion is the glue between personal and collective values. Because if I only concentrate on what's good for Isaac, on what's good for Luke, right, I'm going to be forgetting about what's important for other people in my family and other people in my community. And the way to bring to mind the other people's needs is through relational values of empathy, compassion, concern, and caring. So I think we have to pay attention to the three types of values: personal, collective, and relational. We know in conflict resolution, what works the best is empathy and caring and proximity to the other people, right? Let's be in touch. This is what's called social capital. I can relate to other kinds of people in my community. I do not just live in a segregated, gated community where all the people I see look like me. I can't develop empathy if I just live in an ivory tower. So the last thing I will say is values provide meaning to our lives. When I go to sleep, I think, have I behaved with integrity? And if I haven't, I really have a very hard time with myself. And this is what we learn from the psychology of meaning, from authors like Viktor Frankl and the great book Man's Search for Meaning. He had values of compassion, the value of work. And if we're clear about our values, it's going to be so much easier to do the rest of the hard work in our lives.
I really appreciate that perspective of the importance of how our values matter within this conversation, and in particular, highlighting how relational is that bridge, that connectivity between our personal as well as the collective. And I think part of the other aspect that, just a very different angle than we were talking about today, but because you bring it up this way, I think it's why we're finding those individuals that have that higher degree of emotional and social intelligence, that ability to play within that relational space, are the ones who are so extraordinarily valued as individuals that we need at this time, why they're excelling within their careers and professions and all these different aspects, because they are providing something that is a very vital bridge to us at this time. I think we hear a lot about the independence of personal values. We hear a lot about the need for the collective values, but it's understanding how is it that these relate, how is it that they bridge, and how is it that we can bring these things into balance. It doesn't need to be this or that.
Right.
And
if I might just
please
add a historical footnote that I think will help the listeners remember how these values interrelate. The values of the French Revolution were liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty is about personal freedom, about pursuing our own dreams. Equality is about the fact that all of us in the community are entitled to certain rights and benefits, right? We're all equal. And fraternity is the relational value. And I think the French Revolution got it right. We have to balance my own liberty, what I want, with what's good for everybody else through fraternity, through being in touch with other people. And then it's not either or, but it's all of the above. Personal, collective, and relational. If we pay too much attention to one at the expense of the other, there is either excessive individualism, or I live in an oppressive society where I don't have any freedom of choice because everything is for the collective, quote unquote. And in either case, the relational values have been forgotten. Like you were saying, we need more of the relational value to bring a balance between the two poles.
It is interesting because it really does help us bring into our awareness the level of interconnectivity as well as the level of interdependence for all of these different domains, and whether that's us as individuals to the collective, or even the domains of well-being you were describing before, of the interpersonal, community, occupational, physical, psychological, and economic. They also have an interconnectivity and an interdependence between them as well. So this conversation around the relational values and the relational perspective, I think, is a very, very important one. And I'd say, honestly, that even ripples through exactly what you're describing before around mattering, of understanding the relation of how it is that we help people become and see themselves as valued, to see how it is that they add value, and how it is that fits into this whole that is going on in the given time. With that, I guess to wrap us up, to bring us full circle, Isaac, one of the things that we do, or that we really focus on in this show, is that this is meant to be the beginning of a conversation. So for those listening, it's not just about the insight or the inspiration that maybe they might get from something out of it, but it's what does this begin? And I'm curious from your perspective of what do you hope this begins in the way of an additional conversation or additional energy or momentum for those that are listening today?
Two things. If I can just bring to the audience the message that the humor can help us examine our lives. And if people are interested in following my blog, they can go to thelaughingguide.com. So I have a humor blog, thelaughingguide.com, where I post regularly, mostly self-deprecation posts about how I see myself inadequate in life and how I lead with my own inadequacies. But I think it's really important to begin to pay attention to the role of humor in our lives. And also, if I can ask the listeners to begin seeing themselves and their loved ones through the lens of mattering. What are they doing to promote a family, a culture, a workplace, a community where everybody feels valued and where everybody has an opportunity to add value? And I would love to have a conversation with your audience. I have a quote-unquote serious blog on mattering. people can get to it through professorisaac.com. So if people are interested in following up with my blogs, a conversation, my email is there, either thelaughingguide.com or professorisaac.com. One is funny, one is serious. I think both are important.
Absolutely. Well, Isaac, Dr. Prilleltensky, I want to thank you so much for joining us on One Idea Away, for bringing us just into the depth of this conversation, and particularly around bringing to light what it is that does matter and how important this conversation of mattering really is to each of us.
Thank you so much.
So for everyone, Dr. Prilleltensky, Isaac gave out a handful of things. The laughingguide.com. I do want to encourage you to check out the Laughing Guide to Wellbeing. It's a fun read, regardless of how much information you also get in it. It's a fun read, and so definitely check that out. And even though to this last point of the conversation of pay attention, bring awareness to, bring your mindfulness to how it is that we each matter, and how it is that you can recognize how other people matter and call that out, to recognize that and to be in relationship with each other from that perspective. That is the type of thing that brings us together in many more ways than can ever divide us, and certainly something that we could use a whole lot more of right now. And so with that, as always, I want to thank you for dropping in on One Idea Away, and until next time, continue to enjoy the journey. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you really enjoyed it, do me a favor, let us know. You can keep the conversation going and send us a message on our Facebook page, which is simply One Idea Away. Go ahead and tag me in the post, or even just direct messages. Also, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this episode along with someone that you believe could benefit from hearing the ideas and the messages that we got into. That's pretty much why we do this. So you can just go ahead and share it from your app or email it along, whatever works for you. The point is to share, to talk, to discuss, and keep the dialogue going, because it's in those conversations that ideas can take hold and create profound shifts in perspective. That's what allows us to live life more fully, deeply, and consciously. As always, we would love to see you post a review for the podcast in iTunes or whichever app you're using. And until next time, remember, you're never more than one idea away from a whole new reality. This is Luke Iorio and One Idea Away, signing off.